So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. My name is Marianna Maksimovskaya. I'm pleased to welcome you on to this plenary session on the immune system of the world economy. Not all seems to be fine with this immune system. Most countries expect to show an economic recession at the end of the year, and some have started speaking of the need for protectionist policies. So what we are going to cover today is the issue of protectionism, whether it is a good thing, and how both economies and households will survive. Our speakers are Yuri, Borisov, Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Oleg Deripaska, founder of Rusal Group, Boris Titov, presidential commissioner for the rights of entrepreneurs, Vladimir Yefimov, deputy mayor for economic policy and property and land relations in Moscow city government, and Mr. Andrey Klepach, chief economist of the State Development Corporation of VEB. And thanks to the Zoom technologies, we will be able to hear Alexander Plekhanov, Director for Transition, Impact and Global Economics at the EBRD office, speaking from London. Also, Arnaud Le Foll, Total Country Chair, Russian General Director from Paris. Good afternoon. And Rudolf Lacy, Director of the Economic Directorate at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development from Paris. And we have with us in the first row their excellencies, the ambassadors of certain European countries, and we would certainly want to hear their views on the situation. Let me start with some statistics and specifics. What about the level of recession that is being forecast by experts? Let's take a look at the video. Since the beginning of the COVID situation, there arose a need for the support of enterprises and households. Today, many countries have fundamentally reviewed their strategies and economic development programs by redefining their priorities. Generally, among the more actively employed instruments, we see three such groups: support of the domestic consumer demand and the government demand, support of the corporate sector, including taxation measures and raised availability of resources, the restructuring of economy in Germany foresees increased demand, and then stabilizing the number of jobs. As to the UK, the priority is infrastructure investment, development of electric transport and support of green industrial clusters, simplifying builders and developers work, then stimulating economic growth in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, as well as creating jobs there. National economic revival plan for Canada, attention to air traffic, inspection of food, attention to culture, sport, and preservation of heritage, timber and wood processing, oil and gas sector, fishery and forestry, support of the academic community. China's priorities are such as new jobs, both in retail and services, financial support of the worst hit holds support of SMEs, and then tackling volatile pricing of raw and agricultural materials. And this is no easy matter. The idea is to introduce new measures of competitiveness and implement a new strategy to consolidate the immune system of the Russian economy. I may add this. The red squares marked a decrease in separate countries, such as in Germany and the US. Russia expects a drop in GDP between 5.5% to 8%. The only exception is China, with a minimal error within the error margin of around 1% growth. Those are the initial effects of the lockdown. Yuri Ivanovich, you have been in charge of the military-industrial complex, but now of the Russian industry as a whole. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is this your first appearance in such an important event? Am I right? After all, I'm really happy because it is always interesting to hear ideas and views from what the government is doing. There is a list of priority industries in the economy, but is there any vision and realization of how to provide support? If I said there were none, we would then have to be dismissed right away. And the question is how effective the measures will prove to be. These are stage-by-stage phased measures, including some short-term ones, including like emergency measures for the year 2020-2021 to get back to the pre-corona crisis levels. And what we are seeking to do is to restore the purchasing powers and jobs. We must always bear in mind that it was back in May 2018 that the president outlined behind the aim of making Russia a fifth economy in the world, but that will need a stable development trajectory, because only then could we foresee a dynamic growth and a transition from the economy of raw materials to the economy of knowledge and technology. I could speak more about that in more detail, but among the midterm measures, we foresee a 5-year perspective, including the quality of our economic policies and approaches, so that we could feel safe irrespective of any shock situations like those caused by this corona crisis, is also as a result of the crisis in the oil sector, which caused decrease in demand. Are you personally advocate of protectionism, and which sectors should be first and foremost supported, those worst hit or the drivers of the economic growth? Yes, there is a rule that it is the strong that need support in the first instance, but I should shift the accent somewhat. When speaking with business colleagues, have been discussed the resetting of our economy and outlining the priority targets that would enable us to restore our economic performance. So the focus should be on the system building sectors. One example could be, as Mr. Deripaska represents here the interest of his holding, particularly in the automotive production. It is one type of production that could be described as a system forming, because one job in that sector generates or creates jobs in adjacent sectors and in related sectors. Through this kind of dynamics, the whole of the technological chain could be reset, and SMEs in particular, when they are worst hit now, could be helped that way. Could you exemplify some of these spheres and sectors that the government will first and foremost provide support? Anything which is totally exotic, shall we say, radio electronics, which is more an exception than the rule. We have reached a situation when we cannot go ahead along with our other agendas without having our own industrial basis for microelectronic production and other types of hardware production. There isn't a single world competitive enterprise in Russia that could compete successfully with Western production. We cannot rely 100% on the imported solutions, and we could always suffer as a result, which we are witnessing in practice. The other sector, although not exotic, so to say, it's oil and gas sector. The crisis has shown that the volatility of hydrocarbons may affect the high value added ratio, and we as a nation with huge reserves of hydrocarbons must pause and reconsider the approach that we should no longer sell raw oil and gas, but rather move on to refinery products, and we must develop the relevant situation for the businesses, the favorable situation, so they could go ahead that path. After all, no nation, or Russia in particular, can develop without its own automotive industry or aircraft building industry. So we do need the corresponding technological and protectionist policies for those sectors. Heavy machine building is necessary because we need locomotives for our system of railways and ships and boats for our trade fleet and maritime navigation. I'm talking in general. We may lag behind competitiveness. The protection measures may vary from subsidies to contracting to customs regulation, but the very fact that we are engaged there in this kind of process just proves the fact that we are getting a better idea of what kind of raw material sectors we are now having. So if we offer a new set of goals for development, that would be even better. But speaking more specifically, how could that be done through government contracting, through subsidies? The short-term plan for the 2 years has been submitted to the president, and we might say that it is already being implemented. But I would rather call it as fire extinguishing or firefighting. Around 2027, perhaps, we must already have in place the right conditions for a dynamic development of our economy that would ensure our economic growth at the level of 3 to 4% annually. Are you as optimistic as Mr. Oreshkin, who is confident we will soon be the fifth economy in the world and stay in this position? I am an optimist myself, but I'm guided by the aims outlined by our president. As a former military officer, I rather tend to obey the orders rather than rethink them. Did you incidentally pay attention to some specific European or American
You paid attention to different European and American programs. They are all different. Have you learned something from these programs? Are you borrowing something from the Western experience? Or does it mean that we have our own path and we have our own solutions? I think it would be naive to say that we are following our own Russian path. I think the laws of development of industry, of the economy, they are transnational, they don't have borders. The economy is developing according to the same laws everywhere, and it would be simply stupid not to use the best methods which the leading economies of the world are using. But I, for one, would probably speak about the following. Emerging from the crisis situation, especially from the falling demand, is important, and we can do it through changing the structure of this demand. So far, we haven't done it, and the role of the state here is important. I think no one, but only the state, the government, should do it, whether we shall be emerging from the crisis using the V scheme or the L chart. It will only be possible if the government has a clear-cut policy and implements this policy consistently. Then the dynamics we need will be possible. Well, there have been different opinions. Some people have said the market economy will regulate everything on its own and everything will be normal. No, it won't. The state is an important player in the market, the biggest player, the biggest actor, and of course it should dictate its interests, it should support its national producers. So I think this is very important. So you think that the role of the state should become more important, and you think it is justified, and we shall see it in the future. The role of the government will grow. The state should take care of its own producers, best producers, different sectors, different branches, create the appropriate investment climate so that in practice, rather than in words, we could ensure a changed structure of our economy, a restructuring. If we don't create such conditions for a specific business, and representatives of these businesses will speak a little later, I think nothing will change. But the government has the idea of how the state should increase its role in planning the economic recovery, economic development, or do you think there could be some turns in this policy? Marianna, I think that these methods and these plans, roadmaps, are not created in the offices of the White House. We are discussing them with entrepreneurs, with Mikhailov, Oleg Deripaska, Mr. Zhukov, and many other players, the economic actors who are prominent in certain branches or sectors, with aviation, with aircraft building, with the transport industry, because these are the people that will be implementing the plans and make our plans reality and work for the people for whom we are doing all of this. Now, on a slightly different plane, well, people are speaking about the second wave of COVID. Even the first one hasn't come to an end, but people are afraid of the second one. Do you think that industry for which you are responsible, you are in charge of it, do you think there may be a lockdown? Well, speaking of forecasts, Andrey, I think, will be able to say more to you. But now we have statistics for 8 months, and it is encouraging. The situation is not so critical, and the rate of the recovery of different branches is quite optimistic. It means that we can hope that we shall emerge from this situation fairly quickly. How can it be affected by a second wave if it comes? Well, I think that the measures which are being taken by the Rospotrebnadzor and the Health Ministry, they are suggesting that we are faring quite well. I mean, if you compare the number of those who are tested, the number of those who fell ill, the number of those who have recovered from COVID, from 10,000 people who were falling ill on one day to the figures which we have now, when they are about 5,000, give us grounds to hope that maybe we shall be able to avoid a second quarantine, which actually paralyzed our industry in March or April. It was very interesting to hear such an answer from you. It gives us hope. Now, maybe it is a myth, but people tell such a story about you. They say that you have a big screen in your office room, and that you can see different workshops, the shops in some strategic plants, in strategic industries, and that some time ago you saw empty shops without workers. You told someone that that is the situation, but that was the situation, and you said that it was unacceptable and the situation changed. Now, actually, until 2018, I was Deputy Defense Minister, and when Sergei Shoigu returned to his office once, as the person who is responsible for the defense of the country, he took a number of measures, and I was involved in it, even with quarantine restrictions that, you know, were in force in Moscow and in Russia. We succeeded in organizing work with all the restrictions or safety regulations abided by, and we did it. We were upgrading the number of the people working at different plants. We organized work in many shifts. We used work online, distant work, for as many as possible. And I can say with authority that that difficult period, at least for the military-industrial complex, was organized. And I'm sure that the military-industrial complex will meet all the target figures, even despite the pandemics. In other industries, the situation is different. But in those spheres, well, it was possible to do it. Actually, this legend has some grounds for emerging, but it was not actually due to me, myself. Okay, now I would like to ask you, the businessmen of your level are very often called the captains of business. What is your impression? Are you satisfied with the methods of support of business that have been taken by the Russian government? The question is addressed to Oleg Deripaska, I understand. I think we have assembled here for the Stolypin Forum. And I would like to say that he, Mr. Stolypin, actually did something that was impossible, unthinkable. We all remember what was happening in 1905, and he was able to change the country. He created the class of peasants who were well-to-do, who were then rooted out by the Bolsheviks, and it took about 10 years. He created some plants that were the backbone of Russia's industry. He built railroads. He was a person who understood the country, and I think it is important to remember that the most important issue is not who will give something to somebody or what the kickback will be. I think that when the government and Yuri Ivanovich, as one of the members, analyzed the situation, they have done a very important job. If we don't understand what the architecture of many radio electronic devices is, if we don't understand the architecture of different businesses, how can we work? We should understand the system. Of course, all the components are important, all the spare parts, different parts of aircraft and other complicated technological devices. And it should be understood why the situation in these industries is complicated, not only because of the coronavirus. Stolypin believed that the market relations are important even when the state, the government, is actively involved. We should remember that he created the Legislative Assembly, the State Duma, which undertook the most important reforms that helped raise the level of development in Siberia. So I would rather speak of other things that impede us in our development besides the coronavirus. We had a referendum, and 51%, as some people say, suggested that they would opt for a different option, for a different path. And as of today, these 51% who voted, their income is less than 5,000 euros. And I think this is a very humble figure, even if compared with Poland, for example. And the members of the government have to say economic growth of 1 or 2% is simply maintaining what we have. We should be saying that it's not how the government will redistribute the budget between different industries. Our country is vast. If you analyze the budget, you have to subsidize the interest rates in the on what the government borrows from the government, and they charge very high money. Yuri Ivanovich and his colleagues is looking for different resources in order to offset the interest rates. this? Well, the thing is that we shall not be able to ensure that the people who voted for a different system is that we must be attractive for investment. Underfunding, even if we compare ourselves with comparable economies, is 3 times worse. When we say that inflation is fairly low, well, the benefits are doubtful. I thought that you would start with criticizing the government, and you decided to take the bull by the horns and started with the criticism of the central bank. Well, could we speak about more specific things? Measures of support and protectionism. No, we don't need measures of support. Who do you mean by we? The whole private sector. Support is for those who are poor, and the successful people, and there are quite a few of them, and they want to develop different productions, production of different parts for what we need to build. Sometimes they want to change what they produce, and they cannot obtain the money because what the central bank does sometimes is prohibitive. Some of its procedures are prohibitive. People don't get enough money for investment. Money is generated by the system. When you look at the European bank, at the Japanese bank, the Federal Reserve, we speak about the resources. Money should be added to the economy, but our economy seems to live according to some other laws. Well, a lot of money has been attracted to Moscow, drawn to Moscow. Moscow is living just fine, but many industries and plants don't have money. We have a debt market which is a little better than robber lenders, so to speak, at very high interest rate. We don't have other interests, other instruments. We don't have real credits. We didn't need any support until 2008. The foreign markets were open to us, and we borrowed at a much lower interest rate, and the economy was developing. Then, artificially, the central bank was somehow removed from this system. I understand that Medvedev and Shuvalov wanted to create a mega regulator, but the central bank should be acting together with the government, and it should be creating the money supply that would be used for what the government is planning to do. But how should this money supply be created? It shouldn't be done by printing the money, or should it? No, nobody is printing anything. Banks are not working with paper money. And everyone is only using the smartphones. Well, we should have government bonds. We should have other securities. Now everyone, including the military-industrial complex, we are all indebted to banks on a massive scale. And another thing I would like to say, Yuri Ivanovich has already said that we have now made sure that the knowledge economy, high-tech economy, does pose certain risks. We should be controlling some of the electronic devices. We should have the means of controlling this. And all the embargoes, sanctions, and trade wars, I think this is something disgraceful. Some tragedy happens and sanctions follow. It's the consequence of an undeveloped system. Beijing is going to launch a digital currency, and we are so much connected with the dollar that we cannot do a similar thing. If there is some political turn, any turn, something happens, and we hear all kinds of threats from Washington, from Brussels, and from elsewhere. We need a strategy. We support wholeheartedly what the government is doing and what it is doing in the social sphere. The Prime Minister's tour of the country shows that we should determine either 51% remain in the category of poor people, or they will become millionaires. Could you stop here for a minute? Let us make sure that we understand what you are saying. You said that then
you have mentioned all the needs and the political pressures that are not likely to change in the near future. Now, aren't you saying that we can actually establish conditions for the people to improve their living standards? On the one hand, the government has established conditions for the launching of a component base. We have problems with our suppliers who are not in a position to respond instantly to our needs. We cannot reach all of our suppliers. There are tens of thousands of them. Or take microelectronics. You do realize that your order may be just stopped at the customs, and any investment in the component basis means tens of thousands of jobs, hence a decrease in incomes, because people will make more money in those new industries. Okay, let me finish. No, we have not yet approached the issue of the investment. What we need there is a normally function market of debt. The government so far has no opportunity to maneuver among the banking systems. Yet another problem we are facing is that of logistics. If we cannot move from Voronezh to Shanghai within 7 days, or to Hamburg within a short period of time, no one will need our products there. We are exporting our products at the moment, but why don't we start processing our raw materials? That means new jobs, new levels of income in all raw material industries. For 16 years, we will be having 4-year periods of development. I didn't quite get the point when you mentioned those 16 years. So you are talking about the 16-year perspective. Do I get you right when you say that number one problem is the debt market? If there is no debt capital available, we couldn't possibly develop our industry. People are willing to buy housing using a mortgage system. Why can't we provide a 4 to 5% interest percent for mortgage? Everyone seems to be discussing the debt market. 62 trillion is the aggregated crediting amount. It should be 3 times higher. We could perhaps look at China, Indonesia. So this self-contraction is counterproductive, and the government will never be able to ensure further growth. Just one more point for a brief explanation. Speaking of environmental protection, the green economy, where will the money come from if there is no money available for economic development, whereas currently we need to modernize our technologies, and who should stimulate businesses to build new environmentally friendly economy. Again, it is the debt market we should look at. Imagine a medium-sized electricity generator. If there is no increased demand, even then they must have access to credit for environmental projects at, let's say, a 3% interest rate. And Moscow and government agencies in general are subsidizing their enterprises. So it's a kind of a contrast. The overall income of the transport machine building is less than 100 billion rubles, which is it's an economic distortion. We are actually ashamed to mention this. So why a 7% mortgage rate, even a 6.5% one? Even if the government of Moscow should subsidize another 2%. Thank you. We would maybe move on to the issue of megalopolises, to urban conglomerations. Moscow is a rich megalopolis, and it's an object of envy. Let Moscow develop, but we should stop subsidizing Moscow. Take a small city, Bratsk, for example. The situation with pulmonologists may be insufficient when there are 3 pulmonologists to take care of the infected patients. So in these single employer cities, there are companies that are willing to build their both kindergartens and schools. We do not let them do that. Instead, we rely totally on the policies of the central bank, which would buy the American financial instruments in this beautiful, wonderful financial forum. They are drinking very good sparkling wine, not the Russian so-called champagne, which is allowable and affordable, which is affordable by the Russian people, but not the one at the financial forum. Okay, let's get back to this and of the situation in Moscow. I think when Oleg Deripaska mentioned Moscow, he must have spoken more in general terms than in the Moscow city budget in particular. There are innovative policies in Moscow which used to rely heavily on raw material export and import, now seems to rely more on the processing and other payments from Moscow-based enterprises. As to losses being suffered as a result of the pandemic, we are facing the same challenges of decreased income. Economically, it could only be partially explained because most countries start by stimulating consumer demand and production coming afterwards. But we seem to have paralyzed consumer demand and paralyzed the production cycles as a result. As Yuri Ivanovich mentioned before, the military-industrial complex enterprises never decreased production, including in Moscow. But about 300 billion rubles have been spent to tackle the COVID pandemic, to buy consumable materials, equipment, building the high-risk infection hospitals, and so on and so forth. In most indices, we are now back to the levels of 2019, mostly in consumer demand, not so much in food products consumer demand, but because of the delayed demand in other goods, but there is a comparable decrease in the services, particularly in the tourist area. We could not judge entirely by the situation in Moscow because the economic structure here is different from the rest of the country, with the service sector being particularly highly developed and with some distortions in favor of other sectors. We may, sooner than the rest of the national economic entities of Russia, get back to the pre-pandemic levels, but we cannot at the moment indicate any concrete figures, but what we expect is to revert to our initial forecast figures. What do you think has actually worked as measures to tackle the crisis? They seemed to be in support and furtherance of the government-initiated measures. In particular, the measures to sustain liquidity and the money is important. So the state rescheduled the timeline for payments, and we have nullified payments which have to do with estate. I didn't say successful, I meant rather inefficient. Maybe you actually have failed to do something, or maybe less effective measures. I can't say incorrect measures. I don't say we actually introduce such. Some may vary in their degree of effectiveness, but we still facing as a key task the infusion of money into the market and the economies as we develop our budget spending. We always make room for business investment. For us, transport development is always a priority, and that means eliminating the rush hour congestion, but each of the metro station and all the road building construction mean a new point of application. They cause and they result in new investments, in creation jobs, thus allowing businesses to invest into their own development. Maybe you've been hurt by Mr. Deripaska's saying that we should no longer, so to say, feed Moscow. No one is actually feeding our city budget because we rely on contributions from Moscow-based economy. Moscow, as a huge urban conglomeration of the world level, is better placed in terms of competition, like any other huge conglomeration in the world. And the investment made in Moscow will always be more cost-effective, even if the conditions may not always be favorable enough. But some of such projects can never be implemented in a small city. Are there any sectors that actually have not been affected by that? What about the farmer? IT industries.
If we look at Moscow industry, well, of course, we don't produce many automobiles, but the pharmaceutical companies, the food processing companies have grown by about 6%, even though there was a reduction during the 4 months. But in July, we saw an increase of 10%. And this is the effect of a major city and a diverse economy of the city, which made it possible not to stop the investment projects. They had a new lease of life, so to speak, and many are being relaunched. And one of the measures we're using is the measures to support the domestic economy. And we are a considerable actor in the market of buying, procuring domestically produced buses. But we don't simply want to buy a domestically produced bus, but a very good bus produced domestically. If you take Mash Holding, we cooperate with Oleg Deripaska in that. Well, now there are plants which produce trams which are better than many trams on the world market. And we should be doing it. But here, well, this program of procurement by the government of Moscow is, well, met with the should be met with the initiatives of businessmen. Well, I don't have any claims on. I don't criticize what Moscow government is doing, but we should be developing not only Moscow, we should be developing the country. If you bring someone from the region to Moscow, well, it would mean a lot of investment, because the whole family should be brought and, but you can't change the capital of the country, so to speak, and move the capital from country to country. Okay, but once it was moved from Petersburg, from Moscow to Petersburg, and then from Petersburg to Moscow. I'm not speaking about it historically. Okay, but now, why is our economy why has our economy been affected by the lack of enough money, of cheap credit? Why do we have all these problems? A weak industrial base, no component industries. I can't agree with you. Our economy, of course, has suffered from a serious blow. The economy ministry has not yet given its forecast for this year. I think our forecast for the fall in the economy is 4.5%. But for the measures of the government, the fall would have been 5.5 or 6%. So the measures have played their role, and our estimate is that the fall is about 4% or 4.5%. In other countries, in many European countries, it has been more dramatic, in some 7 or 8%. Why so? In fact, in some European countries, the rate of the spread of the disease was higher, and the lockdowns were stricter. Well, in most of the regions of our country, industries were working, and even construction was working, unlike a construction industry in Moscow. So the economy has sustained a serious blow. It is serious, but now we are emerging from it, and probably with minimal losses. And the fall of the GDP is not the result of the COVID virus, but with oil. The falling prices for oil, even more the falling prices for gas, which has reduced our GDP by more than 1%, and in terms of the economy, it is also important how the oil and gas industry will be recovering, because it is very important for the budget of the country. And for oil, the chemical industry and the refining industry, for all the hydrocarbon industries, we could actually change our competitive positions, having the resources we have, and then the incomes would be different. In fact, our economy has fallen down, in a limited way, but people have lost more. Their incomes have gone down also by 4.5 or 5%. It could have been even worse. Our incomes, the incomes of the people in our country, have been stagnating since 2013. And unless we change something radically in our economy, in 2021 we shall be at the level of 2012. In 2014, people somehow gave consent to these losses in incomes, because that was seen as the price for the Crimea. But if our economy continues to be crawling in its development, our assessment is 2.5, 3%. The government speaks of 3 or 4%, but in this way we shall not solve the problem of the stagnating incomes of the population. What should be done? Well, I should start with reforming not the central bank, because unlike in the previous crisis, it has not been raising interest rates, it has been lowering them down. Of course, the mortgage credits are very expensive in our country, but the central bank behaved differently. If we look at the money that the central bank has, it's about 4.5 trillion. The problem is not that the central bank doesn't have the money, but that the money is not working. It's easier for the bank simply to keep the money on its accounts, but it doesn't make the money work. And it's a very important question for all the development projects. The central bank does not refinance the credits which our bank is providing. If we want money to go into risky projects, and we do have risks, regional risks, if we want to create the infrastructure somewhere where it doesn't exist, or if we want to have investment projects there, where do we get the money? We used to get the money abroad. Now this possibility is blocked. But there are some internal resources. The money resources, foreign resources, are blocked by the sanctions. Let us take internal resources. We used to use the sovereignty, the sovereign fund, to maintain the exchange rate. Now we have about 7 or 8 trillion. We could, even according to our rules, spend about 700 or 800 billion or to invest the money. Well, why? Is it because of Alexei Kudrin? Now Alexei Kudrin is no longer in the central bank, and he is not working in the finance ministry. He now supports the idea that it should be spent, that it should be used. But well, he was behaving as Napoleon. He is behaving. The central bank is behaving as Napoleon. It seems to be protecting and saving, hedging its main resource. Well, probably that saves the money, but that is not good for the economy. The foreign ministry now says a decision was taken to spend 23 or 24 trillion in the budget, but not everything will be spent. It will not be invested, it will not be used according to the plans this year. Now spending on health was increased, and nominally health spending for next year has been decreased. Well, of course, the artificial ventilation of lungs machinery will not be necessary, but we see that the health system is underfinanced. Now lots of people, doctors, physicians, medical nurses, and all the auxiliary staff were actually sacked, were eliminated from the system. And now we saw that this is not sufficient. So we should develop the health system better. I don't know if there will be a second wave. Probably there won't be any second wave, but there are risks. In 2012, well, optimization was begun in the health system of Russia. Doctors were warning that with such a reform, with such optimization, we would not be ready for a major crisis, for a major epidemic. And now we have seen that this is so. And what we need now is not an optimized budget, but an absolutely different thing. Well, Moscow is a very expensive city, and it has a vast budget, but at least Moscow has a development budget. But do other places in the country country have a development budget? Well, we shall see a lot when there is some reformatting of the economic system. Hopefully, some people who live long enough will see it in 2024. But we should see the results in a year and a half or 2 years. It is like capital refurbishment of houses. When we pay for it, we don't very often see the result of this. Well, we should be speaking about what assets should be privatized, where should companies be given more freedom. Government regulation should be important as a coordinator of efforts when business cannot sort out all its problems within the market system. Our business cannot pay for infectious disease clinics. Business cannot pay for the transport infrastructure programs, because this is a kind of one-off item of spending in the budget. We don't usually recall the programs of building railways and package programs. Our current spending is much lower on many projects. We have not embraced some of the projects which would have helped to create a better infrastructure in other regions of Russia. Very often they show Minsk lately. In 2 or 3 hours a person can reach Warsaw or Vilnius. But in order to reach Petersburg, it would take about 6 or 7 hours. So we should be thinking about Pskov, Smolensk, Veliki Novgorod, and the transport infrastructure is different. So Oleg Vladimirovich suggested that the capital should be moving from one place to another. Well, I don't think that it should be migrating from Petersburg to Moscow, from Moscow to Petersburg, but probably it should be moved to Siberia. Now, speaking of our international agenda, I would like to invite Alexander Plekhanov, Director for Transition, Impact and Global Economics at the European Reconstruction and Development Bank, and is the chief economist. According to the information of the World Bank, the world economy will fall by about 5%, which means that about 11 trillion would be lost. And this amounts to about half of the economy of the United States, just to imagine the scale. But this is the estimate for this year, and this is an exceptional year. We don't know what will happen in the long term. And in the long term, the most important loss is the loss of the human capital. It's much more difficult to replenish. The investment which won't be made this year can be made next year, but the human capital cannot be easily replaced. That is why all the governments insist that schools should be working, that universities should be working, so that the accumulation of the human capital should continue. what are the measures, or what measures of support with respect to the people should be used, and what are the scenarios which the United States used and the European countries, what should we learn from them? Or did every individual country choose its individual scenario? Well, it's like in the novel Anna Karenina, Tolstoy wrote, every happy family is happy in the same way every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Now we can say that the crisis has hit the services sector very badly. Before that, the crises hit either manufacturing or the financial sector, but now it is the services sector. And a lot of people are working in the services sector. In most of the economies, I think in most of the economies, people are working in the services sector. In survey, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, together with the with a research center, with a think tank, it held a survey in different countries, and we saw that the survey showed that medium-income people were affected worse. Many of them said that they had either lost their job or partially lost their job, or their income went down, and so on and so forth. So most of the measures of anti-crisis policy were focused on helping the people who were in need, the people who needed help, people who could work in the formal or informal services sector.
So the approach may vary, and it does vary. The focus was on maintenance of jobs. In the U.S., they focused on direct financial support of the households. If it's a temporary situation, then protection of employment is a very effective measure indeed. Is there any forecast as to how long the situation may persist, and how soon the economies will get back to normal? Are we foreseeing a second or a third wave, if not lockdown, but maybe a semi-lockdown? But if we look at what is called internationally social distancing, then we should say that the service sector could not function effectively with social distancing in force. So a lot will depend on what happens in the sector, in the service sector. Any recommendations that could be made by you for the Russian economy? Is there a scenario in place that Russia could replicate? Is it the need for support of the population, protection of the employment, money market? I think today's discussion has highlighted quite a number of aspects which may prove useful in the support of the economic. Yeah, there are system-forming sectors, and there are individuals who are particularly heavily hit, and they need their most attention. It was Alexander Plekhanov talking to us from London. Thank you very much. I would like to invite the ambassadors from some of the European States who are with us today, in particular His Excellency Pasquale Terracina, Ambassador of the Italian Republic. Italy was one of the first to be hit by COVID-19, and here in Russia we felt a high degree of empathy and sympathy with the Italian people during the initial stage of the pandemic, and the lockdown regulations may have been the most stringent ones. What about the overall impact of it all on the Italian industry and economy as a whole?
Industrial production was reduced substantially, and this has affected the area of Milan, Lombardy, where the industrial base of the country is. But also the service sector has been hit. For example, if you take Rome, tourism for Rome is very important, and we had to register a reduction of 44% of tourist revenues in Rome. So this has prompted our government to launch an extraordinary plan to support financially our companies and our families, in order to avoid that companies go bust and workers lose their job. So a plan of overall 100 billion euros has been put together by our government. But beyond this, of course, now that we are recovering, we are getting out, hopefully, from the worst phase of the crisis. The pandemic is under control. The economy is picking up. We are considering to use the funds that are made available by European Union, the so-called Recovery Fund, overall 750 billion euros, to launch a restructuring of our economy. We want to overcome those obstacles to growth that have reduced growth in Italy for the last 20 years. This means to invest in infrastructure. We have to modernize the infrastructure of the country. This means to accelerate on digitalization. This is very important, not only as a general structure for the country, but also to help the core of the Italian business, which is made of, for 95% of SMEs. E-commerce, for example, will be very, very important to help their development. And also, it's an opportunity to press on green economy, on a more sustainable kind of growth, socially and environmentally sustainable. And there are many things that, thanks to new technologies, you can have combining growth and environmental sustainability. For example, I would like to just remember that 2 days ago at the Ministry of Industry here in Moscow, the presence of Minister Manturov, the Italian company, steel company Danieli, signed a contract with OMK to build in Vixa a new steel plant that has a new special technology, direct reduced iron hot charging process. Through this process, you can produce steel of high quality, reducing by 2/3 CO2 emissions. So there is a way forward to combine, of course, environmental preoccupations, concerns with industrial growth. And there is also room for cooperation at international level, as this agreement has proved.
Thank you very much. Let me add here, we are looking forward to Italy opening its borders for Russians, a wonderful country, what with the exchange rate now being what it is, it may not be so easy, but we're still looking forward to it. And Her Excellency Miss Mard, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Sweden, we would like to hear more about your world-famous Swedish scenario. Your country refused to introduce the lockdown measures, and how did this result in the state of the economy? There is a lively discussion going on here on the podium, and this is what we are discussing in Sweden as well. What terms and conditions there are available for our banks? Stockholm is the capital, but Sweden is not such a small country after all. There are cities and towns outside Stockholm, and that's yet another.
We had the same goal when the pandemic hit us. We wanted to spare the lives of our citizens. We wanted to protect our citizens. We wanted to make sure that those who got infected and got ill had ample possibilities to have the best care in our hospitals. So yes, Sweden have kept schools open. Sweden had restaurants open. We had no hard lockdown. That didn't mean that we didn't take measures. We sure did, because that was extremely important. So we've had a very big transfer of people working remotely. We have strong recommendations when it comes to social distancing. We are trying in the best way also to prepare for what might be a second wave, and I think this is also something that will be staying with us for a long time. We are all looking forward and hoping for a vaccine, but we also need to understand that this is a long-term recovery. So in Sweden, we had a big dip in our economy, especially April, May. The prognosis for this year is minus 4.6% in our national GDP. That's serious for us. We are an open economy. We depend on staying very competitive on the global scene. We had a number of anti-crisis measures, a lot of them concentrated to keeping workforce in the companies, and of course also now being able to see how we can go forward. And that being said, I think we had anti-crisis measures. What the Ministry of Finance just presented is how can we recharge the economy. Therefore, I think, like our Italian colleague, we have nationally taken a big package of 100 billion Swedish kronas to be able to see how we can help our society to come out stronger out of the crisis, concentrated on 3 important areas. Job creation. We have a prognosis of 9% unemployment this year. This is a lot. So we need to concentrate on job creations. We also need to concentrate and keep investing in our welfare system. We saw when the pandemic hit that we had problems. Just to mention one sector, elderly care. We need to have lessons learned of that. And the third, which I think is very important for us, global warming, pandemic or no pandemic, will continue to be a very big problem. And for us, we need to stay competitive, and we think the way to stay competitive is investing in new technologies that will make new jobs and that will create growth for the future. So Monday, just to mention, our Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven, inaugurated a hybrid plant in the north of Sweden, in Luleå. And the ambition with that and with the new technology is that in 20 years, Sweden will be able to produce fossil and carbon dioxide-free steel. And for Sweden, steel is a big part of our heritage. It's a big part of our future. but it's also something that we think that we need to invest for the long term. And of course, we are happy that we had some of the financial muscles to be able to now invest, because we had a very low government debt when we came into the pandemic, the lowest since 1977. So we also understand that we need to borrow, we need to use our resources, and we need to invest for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to your scenario of no lockdown. Initially, the death rate in Sweden was higher than that in your neighboring countries. But today, it seems you have a highly improved situation. Almost every day, 6,000 new deaths are registered, which is not a satisfactory situation, but many of those are senior citizens. That is why now we are making it our priority, namely care of the senior citizens. Each country has its own best practices and must look for itself what works best. We have some experience in that the schools were open, and here we can perhaps share some practices with other countries. Now I would like to speak the ambassador of Portugal, His Excellency Paulo Pinheiro. What was the strategy focused on by the Portuguese government? Is it the support of households, population in general, jobs, businesses?
We have mostly the same scenario of a big impact on the GDP loss. We are forecasting a GDP loss about 6.7 this year, but we are also forecasting a growth for next year, almost 3%. So our main areas of interest will be very much linked to the micro and SMEs, also to the ITs, but we also foresee a big change in the education and in the health systems. Education, because we think that we have to attend particularly to a qualification of our personnel, of the people, of the workforce. So I will say, if you ask me the priority, right now, it's an emergency policy. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. But we know that an economy cannot be fed always in antibiotics. We have to de-antibiotikize our economy for the future and use these emergency times to change structurally our economy. For that purpose, I have a big list of initiatives that I've been taking. We are taking a list for moratorium of loans, particularly for the most needed, for the individual entrepreneurs, easy access to the credit, social institutions, private social institutions, also to increase the access to markets of local food, the local food industries, and particularly the SMEs and the micro, to bring back young people to the market. We are forecasting a big, around 9% of jobless rate. So we are right now, besides the emergency measures that we are taking in the fiscal side, in the budgetary side, we have this bazooka from the EU, we have a bazooka from the national economy. We are right now thinking out of the box. And for that, the government asked a group of economists to come up with some ideas that will be discussed within the government in the coming days and will be discussed in the parliament. Some of ideas have to do with how to re-energize the economy, besides the tourism. Tourism is almost 10% of our GDP. tourism will be heavily affected for the next years. So how can we reinvent the economy? And so these people that are thinking out of the box are also looking to the other experiences, including Russia, by the way. And what's happening in China, we have a strong relation with China as well, and in the US and Latin America and Africa including. So basically is what will be the long-term consequences of this? This is the biggest challenge of our lives in terms of economic terms, for sure. This is bigger than the depression of the end of the 20s. But in what terms? Because it affects differently, it's the same pandemics, but it affects differently each country. So we thought that this is a time to accelerate the digital economy and to have a strong acceleration of the digital businesses, tax-free, mostly tax-free digital work, and also to accelerate the energy transition to a more green transition. And of course to create a new innovative hubs of Portuguese industries and SMEs, and particularly to bring the young people with the old people, not only the young, but the old people back to the market and looking at hubs with Portugal that has, with Africa, with Latin America, with Brazil, with the rest of Europe for sure, with Russia and China. So we are working these, really thinking loudly and trying to be as critical as we can, to know what are our fragilities, our vulnerabilities, but also to know exactly what are our best added value in terms of global economy and the European economy and the geographical economy, regional economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your contribution back to our agenda, and maybe we could discuss some of the scenarios. Mr. Deripaska, I wonder anything you can say other than stripping the banks. Oh no, I'm sorry, the moderator is addressing Mr. Borisov. Now that we have heard most of the contributions, we may make certain conclusions. Let's consider two key factors that have hit our economy. On the one hand, it's the pandemic, and on the other hand, a decrease in oil prices. But we must consider a third factor. Those are our internal structural difficulties.
So these structural problems are important, which we felt long before the crisis, before 2014. And this suggests that the economic model, which is pursued in our country, which is implemented in our country, is no longer justified, because we are a resource-based economy, and it is administered from top to bottom. The government receives the money from exporting the oil and gas resources. The money is collected by the state, and the government uses the money to stabilize society. And of course, when oil and gas prices and prices for metal and mineral raw materials were high, the model probably was justified, and we were developing dynamically. But now the system actually cannot function because such prices don't exist, and this economic model has stopped to be justified. And the time of cosmetic reforms has already ended, as the Stolypin Institute is saying. The plan created by the government is nevertheless a plan established to the old criteria. All the ministries write what their proposals are, what they would like to have, then some of the suggestions are crossed out, and, well, about 150 statements are chosen from all the lists that have been received. But this is not a change of economic policy. This is improving the model, perfecting the model, but this is not changing the model. And with such oil and gas prices, we need a changed system. And of course, there is an alternative, a strictly vertical economy, very much controlled from top to bottom. It can produce some results, but this is not true of the long-term prospects, because we know how such vertically shaped systems end up. What we need is a competitive economy, an economy which is based from bottom to top, when there are many companies, many actors which create jobs, which create competition, which make the country work for its citizens. But of course, such an economy is much more difficult to manage. It's not easy to regulate. It's not simply, 15 or 20 or 100 companies that should be managed from above. It should be a system which should be adjusted correctly. You are always asking why, how, what is the problem. The new model requires new institutions, and they are the economic institutions, the judicial institutions. Everything should be different. And it should be done, and it would be better if it is done as soon as possible. But returning to the financial policy, to the credit policy, the whole world knows it. The whole world, of course, knows also the word emission, money printing. But we actually know that money is printed, and any payment by the central bank does mean that there is emission, because there are no accounts, there is no money in its account. The growing money supply is a normal process. Well, if it is the money earmarked for certain projects which create added value and which return back, because these are because these are credit resources, well, they don't have any inflationary effect. But if and if the growing money supply does not create such pressures on the economic system, which actually stir up inflation, we actually don't have a money market, though the regulator has assumed this function as well, because they actually have to authorize IPO for every company. So they have to guarantee the risks of this IPO, but they don't actually analyze the securities even of the biggest issuers. And under such a system, the economy would not be developing. And this applies to big companies and smaller ones. We don't have project funding in the proper meaning of the word. Project funding should be done by a special institution without any collaterals. And however much we have applied for this, there's no movement towards this. The rules which exist for making reserves for project funding, they make it actually impossible. So many many people have started nodding because they seem to be in full agreement with you. But this is only one question. And there are other questions. There's the taxation system, which now stimulates removing money from the economy. You pay 13% on the income and then continue living in a different country comfortably and quietly. But the taxation system should make investing money, reinvesting it in your own company or in something else, should be, well, in the interests of the producer, of the entrepreneur. Well, everything, even the tariffs for electricity, for gas, and so on, representatives of the Intral company have said that they are lower than the tariffs in Europe, but they are higher than in the United States already. We also have customs problems because of the customs. You said that there should be some barriers, there should be some protection or some protectionism. Mendeleev once wrote about smart tariffs. But we should not be closing from the world. We should have the correct regulation. The import of capital should be absolutely free. The import of the means of production should be, on this we should impose some customs, but we should also allow the domestic production to develop. And there could be high customs on luxury goods. This is the principle on which the whole world is working, except us. I'm sorry, Marianna, but now I would like to say to the end, to explain in full what we are saying. We have drawn up one plan in response to the request from the President, a plan of sustainable development and growth for the non-raw materials sector, and we are raising the issue of priorities. Yuri Ivanovich spoke about the system of priorities. We cannot spread the resources thin all around on every project. We have analyzed all the European strategies. Recently, Boris Johnson had a development strategy drawn up, though the previous Prime Minister also had a strategy. China has drawn such a strategy, and every program has priorities, and they are not sectoral, they are not focused on certain branches, and some resources should be targeted and should be earmarked for them. And we believe that 8 priorities should receive such attention. We argue with Andrey Nikolaevich. He tells me, you should be more modest. We cannot achieve growth of more than 5%, but we believe that growth can be higher. The growth rate can be higher if there is a new economic policy. And the economy of simple things. Do you know that we import nails from Finland, Belarus, and China? The simple thing that we can do, but regulated correctly. Small businesses can start working in manufacturing very quickly. We speak about Stolypin Reform 2.0, and it is still relevant because if people want to work in agriculture, they should get the means of production, the equipment, land, and a credit. And a lot of investors might be may be attracted by this. I will not list all the 8 priorities, but I will mention one more thing. There is enough money in the country, but there are not enough heads, think tanks that think about it. We don't have any centers for managing reform. The world has already invented such a thing. Delivery union, I think, in Britain was created, and the same mechanism was used in Thailand and Singapore and Malaysia and so on. And they made the economy develop quickly. And the essence is separate the development of the economy of development from the routine development. When the lavatory gives you a headache because it is not functioning properly, you cannot think about exploring space. Yesterday, the president of Kazakhstan announced that they are creating such a delivery union, an agency to develop reforms. It is correct that you can't change the whole governance system. There was a plan, but it actually failed because our public officers, public officials, public service servants are such a strong force that they can block anything. So if we create such a delivery union, which should analyze the statistical system, tomorrow we are going to introduce our index of small business, and it is based on the Sberbank statistics, then Rosstat statistics, the Russian statistics department. And it is much more accurate as compared to it. And we should be planning in an indicative way, and we should also manage reform. Without this, nothing is possible. Well, I think you have taken us to a new level of summing up. And now we have 2 short Zoom speakers. No one can forget about the green economy. And now, once again, I would like to welcome Mr. Wacy. I would like to ask you about the green economy. It is very good, it is desirable, but how can it be implemented in developing countries which are living through a crisis? Because green economy is expensive, isn't it?
Well, yes, of course it's expensive, but we believe that it is feasible to create more jobs, more wealth, and also to create healthy conditions for the society if we invest in low carbon and resilient infrastructure. The COVID-19 crisis has had massive effects on various environmental dimensions, both positive and negative. We know that, including a significant decline in global CO2 emissions, and improvement in urban air and water quality. You remember that very clearly because of the emissions that were coming from industries and many transportation modes stopped during the lockdown period. We improved many of the services that we are, of course, using the cities to manage plastic waste, for example. And this is something that is relevant. So we have to invest more on environment. We have to build back better by creating a recovery that is green, inclusive, and enhance the resilience of our economies and societies, as I was saying. Unfortunately, according to a number of studies, the amount of funding directed so far towards green measures is outweighed by the funding for non-green measures. So we are seeing trillions delivered to restart the economy, but only billions to those investments that could help in the environmental problems that we are facing. Some of them are global environmental problems. So the opportunities for the green recovery include undertaking fundamental restructuring of critical sectors. For example, energy, transportation, water, telecommunications. Before the crisis, we were estimating a 7 trillion need every year to, of course, align our priorities on the Paris Agreement goals. Now, we are only measuring a little bit less than 1 trillion on green recovery actions. I think that it is important to prioritize those measures or actions that, of course, can create the conditions that the population is asking for. Now that we saw clean air, we would like to have, of course, air quality that the air quality that we need to even avoid the expansion or the dissemination of the infection. We know, for example, that 1 microgram of cubic meter of particulate matter can increase 8% of the deaths because of the COVID. And in Europe, they replicate the studies of Harvard. Those numbers are coming from Harvard. But in Europe, we are measuring 16% more deaths associated to COVID because of the air pollution. So we have to take in account that kind of measures in the stimulus packages, but also in the green recovery plans for the long term.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for taking part in our plenary meeting. And now one more Zoom meeting. And I would like to invite Mr. Arnaud Le Foll from the Total company.
Can you hear us? Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Yes, I can hear you.
Еще раз здравствуйте. Ну, во-первых, хочу сказать, что Total не свернул инвестиции.
Total has not curtailed its investment in the Russian projects. We have been speaking a lot about the cost of money, but more specifically, as to your country, how are you tackling the crisis? You are a very important major company globally. Or have you been affected in any way?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us to this important event. Total indeed is the fourth largest oil and gas company in the world, but Total is as well embarked in a journey to become what we call a broad energy company consistent with the Paris Agreement. And I think one very important point, and I will come back to that, is that during this crisis, our stance has been very clear, is that we had to react, of course, and we had to react vigorously to the crisis. But at the same time, we had to protect our investments into the broad energy portfolio, because we cannot afford to be delayed on our transformation path to a broad energy company in line with the Paris Agreement. So if I come back to this unprecedented crisis for the oil and gas industry, we have to remind that we were facing actually 3 crises simultaneously. First, of course, the health and sanitary crisis from COVID-19. Second, an oil crisis with a large demand destruction, with the prices collapsing to a level very low, not seen for 20 years, together with a severe prolonged economic downturn. And we have a third crisis, which is hitting hard the industry, which is the climate crisis, which is a long-term challenge, but that we have to address as an oil and gas company. Now, what I've said is that Total is actually a better position to weather what we call this perfect storm with these 3 crises together than during the last crisis of 2014-2015. We have actually embedded in our own business model our own resilience, and I will explain and guide you through it. This resilience relies on 4 pillars. The first one is HSE, health, safety, and environment. The second one is to deliver. The third one is cost, and the fourth one is cash. So HSE, deliver, cost, and cash. On HSE, the first pillar, on health, it was obvious we had to protect our employees during the crisis. And so like everyone, we went very quickly to remote working. This proved quite successful, actually. At the same time, we had to maintain and support our customers. So we maintained the deliveries of energies to our customer portfolio, whether it's gas, electricity, or petroleum products, and maintain our operations. And this, of course, we had to go through all the various steps with, at the beginning, lockdown, quarantine, and low availability of testing. But step by step, we have put together a system which allows today Total to operate seamlessly in all our countries. We have like 80% of the staff coming back to the office, and we have been very diligent when it was possible in every country to bring people back to the office as swiftly as possible. We are now even investing in our own testing machines so that we can be independent from the laboratories and can maintain continuous operations worldwide in all our countries. Second is safety. Of course, despite the crisis, there was no compromise on the safety of our operations and our workers on the site. This is one of our core values. And the third part of this first pillar is environment. As was said, we have a strategy, and we are on the path to being a broader energy company. And we have actually, in the middle of the crisis, we have reviewed our targets for low carbon electricity production to a much higher level. And now we target by 2050 to be a net zero company for our operations worldwide. We target to be a net zero company in Europe, including the emissions of our own customers. And we want to improve our carbon intensity for our products by 60% by 2050. And these targets, they were reset actually in the middle of the crisis, when I think it was important for us to show and to demonstrate that we were able to stay on the track. So that was HSE. Second pillar, deliver. Because when you don't master the external environment, actually you need to be excellent in your own operations across all segments. And the target was, of course, to get the most and the best of all our assets in terms of availability, in terms of execution of the development projects on time and on budget. And specifically for Russia, as you mentioned, actually, we protected all the budgets that was earmarked for the Arctic LNG 2 project in the Arctic with Novatek. We made sure that those budgets would not be impacted by our capex reduction program, because those projects that are in our portfolio today, they are a success of tomorrow, and that we have to make sure that we deliver actually this project on time. And then cost and cash. Of course, we had to react, as I said, during the crisis. And before calling for help from government, which actually we haven't done, we turned back to ourselves, we turned back to our shareholders. So we took drastic actions on our capital investment projects and budgets. We reduced by $4 billion our investment this year. But as I said initially, this $4 billion reduction impacted the oil and gas project, but the projects for low carbon electricity were protected. And we have kept the $1.5 to $2 billion investment budget on that segment. We have increased our operating expenses reduction targets to $1 billion for this year, which we successfully are in path to achieve. And third, we called to the shareholders as well, and we actually reduced the shareholder return by $2.5 billion by stopping the share buyback in order to finance our operations and projects. Because we entered the crisis in actually a much better shape than during the crisis of 2014, with a very low debt. Our gearing was only 17% at the beginning of the year. A very low cash break-even. Our cash break-even was $25 per barrel compared to $100 per barrel just 6 years ago. Very low OPEX in upstream, with close to $5 per barrel cost in upstream, and a reduced investment budget. Actually, we were much stronger to weather the storm and to be prepared for this crisis by implementing this 4-pillar strategy, as I mentioned. So as a conclusion maybe, and 4 lessons learned from Total to be shared with the participants today, is that first, we have seen definitely the value of our integrated business model, not only extracting oil and gas, but transforming oil and gas and distributing the products to the final customers to be integrated all along the supply chain. This is exactly what we are doing in the power segment as well. We produce the gas that we want to transform into electricity in our own power plants, together with renewable power production. The second lesson learned is that we have actually proved the reality of the low break-even portfolio and the quality of the portfolio of Total. that demonstrated through actually not so bad results in the second quarter, that despite lowest prices ever for the last 20 years, we could still deliver good and positive actually income to the market. Third, we have demonstrated as well our ability to act on our costs. And that's very important, not to be a prisoner of the supply chain and of the cost of our contractors. So acting on that with this increased $1 billion reduction target on our OPEX. And fourth, we are absolutely convinced, and I think I insisted a lot on that, that by the interest of developing a portfolio of renewable and low carbon long-term projects to deliver stable results and address the rising demand for cleaner energy. Thank you.
Большое спасибо за такой обстоятельный ответ. Спасибо.
Thank you very much for this very informative and profound answer. Yuri Ivanovich, maybe you will sum up what we have just been saying. We are totally behind our timing schedule, and with your conclusion, we may finalize our discussion. It seems to me that Boris Yuryevich has already summed up what we have done here. We need a systemic work, and that will help people improve their living standards. Thank you very much, all the speakers and all those present.
Среднему бизнесу в столице. В нее входят субсидии и гранты, акселерационные программы, а также образовательно-консультационная поддержка и ряд других проектов, направленных на развитие малого и среднего бизнеса столицы.
Мы специализируемся на выпуске изделий из огнеупорной керамики и фильтровальной керамики.
Skillfolio — единственная комплексная платформа, которая позволяет производить диагностику, индивидуальную траекторию развития и все это делать полностью в цифровом формате.
Мы широко используем меры поддержки, которые предлагает Департамент предпринимательства и инновационного развития города Москвы.
Вот настолько грамотно выстроенная программа в акселераторе нам удалось не просто развить свой бизнес. Мы за первый квартал сделали оборот больше, чем за весь предыдущий год. Я очень благодарна Департаменту предпринимательства и инновационного развития за то, что действительно осуществляется поддержка предпринимателей. Быть предпринимателем на самом деле тяжело. Это постоянный вызов каждый день.